Now, Parliament's Select Committee on Public Enterprises and Communications has described the cost of communication in the country as brutal and abusive towards South Africans. And with regards to high data and airtime costs, the committee has instructed the Independent Communications Authority, or Icasa, to deal with network companies that it says are getting away with murder. Icasa briefed the committee on the availability of the spectrum and how it can reduce the cost of communication.
Spectrum is the term used to describe broadcast frequencies and signals used by TV, radio and telecoms for communication. The spectrum is a vastly contested space which service providers vie for. Last year, Icasa auctioned off the spectrum to the tune of more than 14 billion rand. Vodacom and MTN, South Africa's biggest network companies, bought the lion's share of that space. The committee is, however, concerned with how service providers are managing the space and the cost at which it comes for consumers.
It has reached a level of not an abuse, I would say a brutal exploitation of the poorest of the poor. Our country is one of the few that charges exorbitant pricing when it comes to data. And the brutality of it is that, we are a country that has high level of unemployment, and people who seek employment have to communicate through, these services, and they require a data that is reasonable in terms of price.
Deputy Minister of Communication, Phali Mapulane, says the department is as concerned.
The issue of the cost of data, particularly mobile data, is one issue that we are facing a potential revolution in the country. So data has become a serious commodity, which we must make sure that it's accessible.
Poor work and connectivity, especially in rural areas, is another concern.
If we can have a rapid assurance of that there is signal, there's network, and people have access, to the net in a manner that it's not something that is a substandard. Like with speed is good, everything is actually upside-cop, if I may put it that way. So that's what we require here.
Makiva called on Icasa to put pressure on the companies it gave licenses to. Icasa says operators will be given targets with timelines set to ensure better services are covered and costs are reduced.
Access to additional spectrum enables network operators to optimize network deployments, improve coverage, increase capacity, and enhance the quality of service. These benefits can lead to cost savings in the long run and a more efficient use of resources. And access to additional spectrum can have a positive impact on cost of data.
The committee says it's aware Icasa has a mammoth task ahead. It says investment in infrastructure dealing with coverage should be forced and has called on the entity to put its foot down to make sure service providers are meeting their obligations to consumers. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
Well, for more clarity on this, let's welcome Mr. Jan Vermeulen, the editor-at-large at MyBroadbrand. Mr. Vermeulen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Look, this is not the first time that the issue of exorbitantly high data prices comes into focus. I mean, the Competition Commission had long ruled that they should be slashed. What do you think is still lacking in terms of addressing this issue?
Yes, good evening. This is hearing this out of the Select Committee actually makes me mad, and I can't help but wonder if this is cheap political point scoring, or what's at play here. Because I also heard, in the voice clip now, or in the soundbite now, about worrying about riots and civil unrest as a result of this. But the fact is, South Africa's data prices are not one of the few that is high. In fact, there was just last week, there was a study released by cable.co.uk, which looked at just about every country in the world, and South Africa was middle of the pack, maybe a little bit below the middle. If we were a Premier League team, we'd be Nottingham Forest. So far from being the best, but far from being the worst as well. And so, yeah, while that can be better, what's lacking is, it is stable electricity supply. So all of the plans that the operators had made 5 years ago regarding how they would be decreasing prices, all of that was thrown into disarray as a result of load shedding, amongst other things. It's not the only thing. There's several other ways in which government has failed the people, and one of those is the weakness of the rand. We've been grey listed, our sovereign debt has been downgraded, and so the rand is in the toilet. And so that makes it incredibly expensive for operators to buy equipment because that all happens in dollars. So there's a lot that's being missed in Parliament's commentary here, which actually genuinely upset me this time around.
Look, Mr. Vermeulen, last year we know that, I think as we heard also in the clip, that Icasa had auctioned off the spectrum to the tune of 14 billion rand. And we also know that South Africa's two network giants were the ones that actually bought the lion's share of that space. Do you think this was a very smart move in the drive to reduce the prices of data, and how they've been using this space and also the high price it costs for consumers?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So the spectrum will, as Icasa, the Icasa representative said, that is a long-term benefit. That's not something that's going to, in the short term, improve things for the operators, and longer term, let's call it in the next 5 or so years. Mm-hmm. And so that was a very good thing that Icasa did. And that's honestly one of the best things that this administration did under President Ramaphosa, with Minister Nchabeni in charge to make sure that auction goes through. But the operators have not been able to use all of that spectrum until recently, when with a digital migration, there was a bit of a compromise struck between the operators and ETV over the issue of South Africa's digital TV migration. I don't want to get bogged down in the technical details, mm-hmm. but as a result of old analog TV transmissions, the operators couldn't even use all of the spectrum they had bought yet. And so that was only fixed in July. And so we're only going to start seeing the benefits of the additional spectrum coming online years from now. And I have to add that part of the agreement that the operators made with the Competition Commission was to cut prices in anticipation of the spectrum auction. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the benefit of the spectrum auction was already realized ahead of COVID.
Look, when it comes to Icasa, yes, Jan, look, when it comes to Icasa, then do you think that they need to be much firmer when it comes to really driving, or rather dictating, policy and legislation when it comes to these service providers?
No. In fact, a lighter touch might be better, to allow more competition into the space in the form of Starlink, for example, where Icasa has been quite heavy-handed, and with the instruction of government, let's not discount policy and the minister's role in this. And so, if you look at international competition that can come into the space and cause network operators to be innovative and reduce their prices, that's one area where Icasa could improve, or agitate for better regulation to make it easier for operators like Starlink to operate legally in South Africa. That's one example. But one thing that is going to be essential from Icasa is to monitor how interference in the spectrum bands, to make sure that the broadcasters have vacated those bands properly, so that the mobile operators who bought the spectrum can use it. And one of those operators, by the way, is a smaller company called Rain, that's also bought a substantial chunk of spectrum. Yeah. And they can come in and put incredible competitive pressure on the dominant players like Vodacom and MTN to help drive down data prices.
And in closing, Mr. Vermeulen, I mean, when we started the interview, you mentioned that this was just, some politicking by the committee. But do you think that this latest initiative by Parliament Select Committee will yield any results?
I don't know, and I hope whatever they're agitating for doesn't yield negative results, because that is equally a danger when politicians start getting involved in over-regulating an already incredibly competitive space. The best thing a government can do in an incredibly competitive space like this is get out of the way. And by the way, government already actually has, if government wants to play in telecoms, it can. Because government essentially owns most of Telkom, which is a mobile operator and a fiber operator. It has a finger in telecoms already. And so it doesn't need to rely on heavy-handed regulation to stamp government's goals or developmental agenda on the telecommunications sector. It has a company with which it can do that. And so I truly hope that, what comes out of what the Select Committee is doing now is not, for example, trying to regulate prices. That's a huge mistake. It's just a bad idea. It's going to ultimately hurt people in the long run if they try to do that. The best thing to do is get out the way, make sure the space is as vibrant and competitive as possible, and that's the thing that's going to drive down prices in the long run. And that's honestly what I'm hoping for.
And in closing, Jan, I mean, why do you think South Africa has the highest data prices when compared to other countries? What sets us apart from the particular models that other countries are using?
So firstly, we don't. And that is a lie that I don't understand why it's being told and perpetrated. It doesn't mean that data prices can't and shouldn't be lower. But for government officials and politicians and parliamentarians to, with a straight face, tell South Africans that we have some of the highest data prices in the world is just a bold-faced lie. And so what's happening in South Africa, right? So just to give you an example, if you look at a market like India, there's 1 billion people there. South Africa has 60 million. So the economies of scale are just astronomically different between us and India. Then if you look at wealthier markets like the UK and the United States, what happens there is people don't buy data 5 Rand here, 5 Rand there. They spend, $20 to $50 a month, and they put it down every month. And that allows those operators to offer entirely different models for their data. And so that is what's happened in South Africa. Is our operators need to cater for the poorest of the poor, people who can only buy 5 Rand airtime a day, a little bit of data here and there, and so they've had to structure their products in a way that is very different from the rest of the world, and they don't have all that economies of scale of the majority of their customers being able to put down over 300, 400 Rand a month to buy a mobile data product, and that changes everything about how the market is structured in South Africa. To put this in perspective, MTN just 2 weeks ago launched a product where for 300 Rand a month you get unlimited voice calls, unlimited SMSs, and 10 gigs of data. I mean, that's you can see the prices are coming down, but the thing is, 300 Rand a month is not something that everybody can afford, and so it's been incredibly difficult to balance their product offering in such a way that they can actually unlock services to people who can only spend 5 Rand, 10 Rand a day. And that's probably one of the major reasons why data pricing in South Africa is very different than if you compare it to United States, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and even other markets like India or Brazil, which just have much more people in them than we do.
Jan, very insightful. Thank you so much for your contributions there. That is Mr. Jan Vermeulen, who is the editor-at-large at MyBroadbrand, weighing in on the high data costs faced by South African consumers.